Stick around for the definitive video on whether or not the USA is in a recession or not. What's it say? No recession.
No recession.
No recession.
No recession.
No recession.
No recession.
Are we in a recession?
Yeah.
Q2 GDP came in negative, and that means there's been 2 consecutive negative quarters of GDP growth. So that means we're officially in a recession, right? Not so fast. The White House caused a big controversy earlier this week when they released a blog report saying that the US was not in a recession, despite the fact that there's been 2 quarters of negative growth in a row. This one's tricky because the NBER is the organization that officially says whether or not we're in a recession, and they reject the definition of a 2-quarter consecutive GDP decline as being a recession. Instead, they define a recession as a period of significant decline in economic activity that is spread across the economy and lasts more than a few months. Okay, so this is a weird debate. It's obviously pretty subjective and silly and worthy of a 2-year-old economist. Despite being somewhat subjective, there are 6 primary indicators that go into the NBER's analysis. This includes personal incomes, non-farm payrolls, manufacturing, consumer spending, household employment, and industrial production. So this data has been pretty mixed, but one thing that's pretty clear when you compare it to, for instance, like 2020 and the recession we saw during the beginning of COVID, is that the magnitude of the recent declines here just hasn't been that great, and that's probably why the NBER is so far saying that this isn't a recession. The problem with this debate is that inflation mucks it all up, and so even though we technically had relatively good growth and employment growth in the last few years, inflation's been high, and so I think your average person feels like the economy hasn't been that great because real incomes are declining, and that means that they feel worse off than they did before. A good way to understand this is to look at the misery index. The misery index is the inflation rate plus the unemployment rate, and currently it sits at a relatively high historical level, and when you look at this compared to consumer sentiment, this chart from Joe Weisenthal shows it pretty clearly. This is why people feel like this is a recession, even though it might not technically be a recession. So sure, the NBER is probably right. Even though this isn't a technical recession, I think our 2-year-old economist has it more right. This feels like a recession. If you like 3-Minute Money, then like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments if there's topics in the future you want me to cover. Thanks for listening.